On a rain-soaked morning in October 2018, a routine chore in a quiet village on the outskirts of Hangzhou turned into a scene of horror. Beneath a heavy tarp in a muddy scrapyard, a local woman discovered the decomposing body of a 19-year-old girl, half buried in trash and stripped of her dignity. This was not a random tragedy, but the brutal, cold-blooded conclusion to a digital romance that had been festering in the dark corners of the internet. Who was this girl, and what dark secret was hiding just 30 steps away from where she was found? Before we unravel this disturbing case, please consider supporting our work by hitting the subscribe button and turning on notifications. The autumn of 2018 brought relentless rain to the Zhejiang province of China. In Xiajiao village, a small, secluded community nestled against the mountains in the southern rim of Wuning district. The fields were sodden, and the air hung heavy with the scent of wet earth and decaying straw. It was a quiet place, the kind of village where neighbors knew each other's schedules and doors were often left unlocked. But that sense of rural security was about to be shattered. On the morning of October 13th, 2018, the rain finally began to taper off. At 6:40 a.m., the silence was broken by a frantic phone call to the Wuning District Police Station. The caller was Shi Hua, a 56-year-old widow who lived alone in the center of the village. She was a hard woman, weathered by years of manual labor. With no husband or children, she made her living collecting scrap metal and cardboard, piling it up in the empty lot behind her single-story house until she had enough to sell. For days, the downpours had kept her indoors, preventing her from managing her inventory. Seeing the break in the weather, she decided to organize the heap of recyclables in her backyard to prepare for a pickup truck she had hired. She walked out to the back lot, her boots squelching in the mud. The pile of cardboard and scrap was covered by a large, heavy tarp to keep the paper from turning to mush. It stood as high as a haystack. She bent down and gripped the edge of the tarp. She pulled it back, expecting to see stacks of wet cardboard. Instead, as the heavy plastic sheet slid away, a wave of nausea hit her. The smell was not just the musty odor of wet paper. It was the distinct, sickly sweet stench of organic rot. Lying at the base of the pile, half hidden by the debris, was a human body. It was a young woman. She was lying on her side, her skin a terrifying shade of grayish-green. Her abdomen was distended, swollen with the gases of decomposition. She was partially exposed, wearing only a pastel pink dress that had been pushed up to her chest, leaving her lower body completely naked. For a moment, Xie stood frozen, her mind refusing to process the image. The shock paralyzed her. Then, instinct took over. She screamed, a raw sound of terror that echoed through the damp morning air, and scrambled back toward her house to call the police. Her hands shook so violently that she dropped her phone twice before she could dial the emergency number. The police arrived at 7:20 a.m., 40 minutes after the call. The journey to Xiajiao village was slow. The roads were slick with mud, and the heavy rains had made the narrow paths treacherous. When officers stepped out of their vehicles, they were met with the overwhelming smell of garbage mixed with the wet, rotting straw from the nearby fields. It was a grim, oppressive atmosphere. They immediately cordoned off the area. Yellow police tape was strung around Hua's property, isolating the scrapyard from the curious eyes of gathering neighbors. The forensic team moved in, stepping carefully to avoid contaminating the scene. They began the grim task of documenting the site, photographing the body from every angle, and measuring the distance between the victim and the surrounding landmarks. The victim was a young female, estimated to be between 18 and 25 years old. She was petite, standing about 5 feet 3 inches tall. She had long, dark hair that was matted and disheveled. Her fingernails were painted a delicate pastel pink, matching the dress she wore. A preliminary visual inspection revealed no massive open wounds or signs of a frenzied knife attack. However, there were suspicious scratches on her skin, consistent with being dragged across a rough surface. Dark bruising marked her neck and arms, stark against the pale, discolored skin. The state of the body told a sad story. She was dressed in a long-sleeved pink dress that ended at her knees, but she wore no underwear. On her feet were white high-top socks, but no shoes. There were no personal effects nearby, no purse, no phone, no identification. She had been stripped of everything that could tell the world who she was. Decomposition was well underway. The skin in several areas had begun to marble and discolor, particularly around the neck, where a deep, dark furrow was visible even through the bloating. Based on the level of decay and the temperature of the environment, the medical examiner estimated that she had been dead for 4 to 5 days before she was found. The crime scene investigators turned their attention to the ground. The earth around the scrap pile was relatively flat. Despite the mud, there were no signs of a violent struggle. No churned-up earth. No deep heel marks indicating a fight for life. This suggested that the scrapyard was not the primary crime scene. She had not been killed here. She had been dumped here. The pile of scrap itself showed signs of hasty manipulation. The cardboard bundles were askew, suggesting the killer had hurriedly shoved the body underneath and thrown the tarp over it in a panic. On the damp mud surrounding the body, there were only a few shallow indentations, too faint to determine a direction of travel or a clear footprint. One detail puzzled the lead investigator. The medical examiner had estimated the time of death to be 4 or 5 days ago, which would place the murder around October 8th or 9th. However, the region had experienced heavy, torrential rain just the day before, on October 12th. If the body had been lying in this yard for 5 days, it would have been exposed to that storm. The mud and rain would have splattered the body, coating the skin and hair in a thick layer of grime. But that was not the case. The mud on the victim was uneven, concentrated only on certain points of her lower body. It looked as though she had been placed there after the heavy rain had stopped. This discrepancy suggested a chilling timeline. The girl had been killed days ago, kept somewhere else, and then moved to this location very recently, likely within the last 24 hours. The forensic team worked methodically. They collected every potential piece of evidence: fiber samples from the tarp, swabs of strange fluids found on the plastic, and soil samples from beneath the body. Everything was sealed in evidence bags, labeled and logged. By 10:30 a.m., the preliminary processing was complete. The body was carefully placed into a body bag and transported to the Wounding Forensics Center for a full autopsy. Along with the body, the police seized the large tarp and samples of the debris surrounding the victim. They needed to find a microscopic link between this location and the killer. While the medical examiners began their work at the morgue, detectives in Shajiao village started the ground investigation. They interviewed She Shihua and her neighbors. She was adamant. Due to the rain, she had not been to the backyard in days. She had seen nothing and heard nothing. The police checked the missing persons reports for the village. There was no one missing in Xiaojiao village who matched the victim's description. Both She and the surrounding neighbors looked at the photos of the girl and shook their heads. They did not know her. She was a stranger, an outsider who had come to this remote village to die. The investigation faced immediate hurdles. Jiajiao was a rural hollow village, populated mostly by the elderly while the youth worked in the cities. There were no surveillance cameras on the village roads, and private security cameras were virtually non-existent. Tracing the victim's movements or the killer's path to the dump site would be incredibly difficult without digital eyes. Detectives examined the geography of the house. Sheshihua's scrapyard was essentially an open lot behind her home. It wasn't enclosed. It connected directly to the backyard of the neighbor's house, separated only by a flimsy bamboo fence. A thin person could easily slip through the gaps or step over it without making a sound. Next to Shay's single-story house ran a wide dirt path that led straight to the back lot, bypassing the main living quarters. In front of her house lay open rice paddies. Like most homes in the countryside, the wooden front gate was rarely locked. Since she was often out collecting scrap, coming and going at irregular hours, it would have been easy for someone to sneak into the back lot unnoticed, especially under the cover of the relentless rain. The rain had washed away most potential footprints or drag marks. The only surviving physical traces were a few blurred depressions in the mud near the bamboo fence connecting to the neighbor's yard, but they were too indistinct to cast a mold. As the detectives expanded their search, they widened the net to missing persons reports in the surrounding districts. They needed a name. Without a name, there was no motive, no timeline, and no suspect. That evening, at 7 p.m. on October 13, 2018, a breakthrough came from the forensic lab. After 10 hours of intense work, the autopsy report and the fingerprint analysis came back with a match. The victim was identified as Su Yuran, 19 years old. She was not from Wuning. Her household registration placed her in Anrui Town, a township on the outskirts of Hangzhou, nearly 50 miles away from where her body was found. Detectives immediately contacted the family in Anrui. 3 days prior, a worried family had filed a missing persons report for a girl named Su Yuran. The police requested a genetic sample from the parents to confirm the identity. The DNA test was conclusive. The body in the scrapyard was their daughter. The file on Su Yuran revealed a heartbreakingly normal life. She had left her home early on the morning of October 8th. She had told her parents she was going to Hangzhou city center, about 12 miles from her home, to look for a job. By that evening, her phone was off. Her family had searched frantically, but the trail had gone cold. The last reliable sighting of her was at the South Hangzhou bus station at shortly after 6 a.m. on the day she vanished. Su Yuran came from a solid, middle-class family. Her parents were merchants, hardworking people who had built a comfortable life. They weren't wealthy, but they had enough to ensure their children never wanted for food or clothing. Su Yuran was the youngest child, the baby of the family. She had an older brother, 8 years her senior, who was already a practicing doctor. Because she was the youngest, her parents had doted on her. She was sheltered, never asked to do heavy chores or worry about money. She was a beautiful girl, standing 5 feet 3 inches tall, with pale porcelain skin and large, gentle, dark eyes. But while she was blessed with looks and a sweet temperament, she struggled academically. Unlike her brother, the doctor, Su Yuran had a hard time in school. Her grades were average, often slipping to the bottom of the class in high school, particularly in math and science. Teachers remembered her as a quiet, polite girl who never caused trouble, but simply couldn't keep up with the rigorous demands of the curriculum. After graduating high school, she failed the university entrance exams. For the past year, she had stayed at home, helping her mother run their shop. But recently, she had grown restless. She told her family she wanted to be independent. She wanted to go to the city, find a job, and stand on her own 2 feet. On October 8th, after days of pleading, her parents finally agreed. She told them she would go to Hangzhou with a high school friend to sightsee and look for work. She promised to be home before 11 p.m. that night. She never returned. She never called. The timeline established by the police began to take shape. Security footage from the South Hangzhou bus station captured her at 6:27 a.m. on October 8th. She was alone. She was wearing the same pink dress found on her body. In the footage, she also wore a thick down jacket and carried a gray backpack items that were missing from the crime scene. The rain in the video was already blurring the camera lens, making it impossible to track her movements after she left the station frame. That graining, gray footage was the last time she was seen alive. Back at the forensic center, the autopsy report provided a gruesome accounting of her final hours. Based on liver temperature, abdominal bloating, and the development of insect larvae, the medical examiner placed the time of death between 96 and 120 hours before discovery. This confirmed she died on October 8th or 9th, almost immediately after arriving in the area. The cause of death was mechanical asphyxiation. She had been strangled. A purple, arc-shaped bruise, about 1.2 inches wide, spanned the front of her neck. It was dark in the center and faded at the edges. When the medical examiner dissected the tissue, they found massive hemorrhaging in the subcutaneous layers and broken capillaries, classic signs of immense pressure applied while the victim was still alive. The whites of her eyes were filled with petechial hemorrhages, tiny red dots caused by the sudden lack of oxygen. The shape of the bruise suggested she wasn't strangled with a thin cord or wire. It was consistent with a soft ligature, likely a forearm or a strip of fabric, or perhaps bare hands, squeezing with relentless force. Her body showed no stab wounds or blunt force trauma to the head, but her wrists told a story of captivity. There were circular bruises around both wrists, indicating she had been bound with a rope or cord. The autopsy also confirmed the investigators' theory about the body being moved. There were mud smears on her hips, calves, and the back of her dress. These streaks ran diagonally, consistent with being dragged. Crucially, her fingernails were clean of mud. If she had been killed in the mud, or if she had fought her attacker in the yard, her hands would be caked in earth. They were pristine, and then there was the soil analysis. The mud on her dress did not match the mud in Xie Xiuhua's backyard. The soil where the body was found was yellow-brown, fine-grained, and smelled of recycling waste. The mud smeared on Su Yuran's skin and dress contained coarse, gray-green sand particles mixed with decayed dry leaves, the type of soil found on hiking trails, near forests, or by mountain streams. This proved she had been in a wilder, more rural environment before she died or was moved. On the hem of her dress, forensics found a single synthetic fiber, dark blue, unrelated to her own clothes. Under her fingernails, they scraped a tiny amount of foreign skin cells. In her final moments, Su Yuran had fought back. She had scratched her killer. The contents of her stomach revealed that her last meal consisted of noodles, green onions, and a hard-boiled egg. The level of digestion suggested she died 2 to 3 hours after eating. This was a critical psychological clue. Just hours before her death, she was not being starved or tortured. She was eating a normal meal. She was likely with someone she trusted. The sexual assault examination was devastating. Su Yuran had been raped repeatedly, both before and possibly after death. Her body contained a significant amount of seminal fluid. The killer had left his DNA inside her. Armed with the victim's identity, the police executed a digital warrant on her phone records and social media accounts. They needed to know why a girl who said she was going to Hangzhou ended up 50 miles away in a remote village. Her call logs revealed a disturbing pattern. For 2 months, Su Yuran had been in constant contact with a phone number registered in the Wuning area. They spoke daily, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day. But when police ran the number, it hit a dead end. It was an unregistered burner SIM card, bought without identification. Her social media seemed innocent at first, just selfies and food pictures. But police experts managed to recover deleted data from her cloud account. They found a chat log that had been wiped on October 8th. It was a conversation with a user named Xia Zhisheng. The messages were intimate. They called each other husband and wife. They planned a future. But the moment Su Yuran disappeared, Xia Zhisheng went dark. He set his profile to private, deleted his avatar, scrubbed his bio, and wiped his friends list. He tried to erase his digital existence, but he missed one thing. In the recovered cache of Su Yuran's phone, investigators found a screenshot. It was a still image taken from a video call. It showed a young man's face. He had short hair, a high nose bridge, and a distinctive mole just below his left cheekbone. In the background of the photo, visible over his shoulder, was a small single bed and a brown wooden wardrobe. The police zoomed in on the timestamp of the last message Su Yuran ever sent to him. It was at 7:48 a.m. on October 8th. It read, "I am going to give you a big surprise today." She wasn't going to look for a job. She was traveling to meet her online boyfriend for the first time. Investigators dug deeper into the deleted cache, and found a transaction with a ticket broker. Su Yuran had purchased a bus ticket. The bus departed Hangzhou South Station at 7:10 a.m. on October 8th. Its route passed directly through Wuning District and stopped on the main road outside Shajiao Village. She had bought a round-trip ticket. She had planned to come home. The police now had a face and a location. They printed the screenshot of the man with the mole and took it back to Xiaoxiao Village. They showed it to Shi Shihua and the neighbors. The reaction was immediate. They didn't need to study the photo. They knew him. "That's Xia Zhisheng," a neighbor said, pointing at the house right next door to where the body was found. "He lives right there." Xia Zhisheng was the 20-year-old son of the couple living immediately adjacent to Shi Shihua. His bedroom window was less than 30 steps from the scrap pile where Su Yuran's body had been rotting for 5 days. The revelation that the prime suspect lived less than 50 yards from where Su Yuran's decomposing body was found sent a shockwave through the investigation team. The proximity was brazen, almost insulting to the gravity of the crime. But as detectives dug into the background of the young man in the photo, the picture that emerged was not one of a master criminal, but of a volatile, isolated individual whose harmless appearance masked a deep-seated darkness. Xia Zhisheng was born in 1998, making him exactly 20 years old at the time of the murder. He was the only son in a family of 3 living in Shajiao Village. To the outside world, the Xia family seemed unremarkable. His parents were merchants, busy people who left the house early in the morning and often did not return until late in the evening. They were hardworking and provided well for their son, but their absence left a vacuum in the boy's life that was filled by isolation and the internet. Physically, Xia was tall and thin, with looks that could be described as decent, if not somewhat unkempt. But his personality had been a source of whispered concern in the village for years. Since childhood, Xia had been difficult to discipline. He was described by neighbors and former teachers as sullen, prone to explosive outbursts of temper, and completely unable to control his emotions. He was a social ghost. He rarely spoke to anyone other than his parents and avoided community activities entirely. His academic record was a disaster. By middle school, he was already displaying behavioral issues, getting into fights, and bullying younger children, a classic sign of a predator in the making. Yet, he was manipulative enough to play the victim in front of adults. He dropped out of high school and, unlike other young men in the village who went to the factories or the city to work, Xia refused to get a job. For nearly 5 years, he had been a hikikomori, a shut-in. He lived entirely off his parents' support, spending his days sleeping and his nights glued to a computer screen in his cluttered bedroom. His world was confined to that small room, filled with the hum of computer fans and the glow of video games. This isolation had warped his social skills and his understanding of consequences. He existed in a digital echo chamber where he could be anyone he wanted to be. Before police could move to arrest him, they needed physical evidence that linked him undeniably to the body. They could not risk a premature arrest that might allow him to destroy evidence or claim he was merely a bystander who found the body. The forensic team at the Wuning Center accelerated their analysis of the trace evidence collected from the scrapyard. The results were damning. The forensic technicians had managed to lift and reconstruct a total of 12 usable fingerprints from the crime scene. 5 of these prints were lifted directly from the victim's skin and the fabric of her dress. 7 were found on the plastic tarp used to conceal the body and on various pieces of trash immediately surrounding the corpse. Investigators ran exclusion protocols. They eliminated the fingerprints of the victim, Su Yuran. They eliminated the prints of Shi Shihua, the woman who found the body. 3 prints remained unidentified, and they were clear. When run against the National Civilian Database, the system flagged a direct hit. All 3 prints belonged to one person, Xia Zhisheng. The placement of these fingerprints was critical. They were not found in casual locations that could be explained away by an accidental meeting. One print was found on the hem of her dress, Another was found on her neck. The third was found on the cuff of her sleeve. These were points of control and violence. The print on the neck, in particular, overlapped with the bruising that caused her death, with the DNA confirmation from the semen sample still processing but the fingerprint match secured. The police had enough for a warrant. At 6 p.m. on October 15, 2018, the command was given. An arrest warrant was issued for Xia Zhisheng on charges of homicide. The tactical team split into two groups to surround the Xia family home. It was a tense operation. They did not know if Xia was armed or if he would attempt to flee into the mountains behind the village. The house was silent as officers approached the perimeter. Xia Zhisheng was home alone. The raid was swift and overwhelming. Officers breached the front door and moved rapidly to the bedroom identified in the screenshot. They found Xia sitting in his room, surrounded by the squalor of his daily life. He didn't have time to run. Within seconds, he was pinned to the floor, handcuffed, and read his rights. His resistance was non-existent. He seemed almost resigned, a stark contrast to the violence he had inflicted days earlier. As Xia was hauled away to a police cruiser, forensic investigators began a systematic search of his bedroom. The room was a chaotic mess of clothes, electronics, and trash, but it was a goldmine of evidence. The first thing they noticed was the layout. It matched the screenshot from Su Yuran's phone perfectly. The single bed, the brown wardrobe, the angle of the desk. On the floor, tossed carelessly among a pile of dirty laundry, investigators found a dark blue sweater. It was worn and frayed. When analyzed later, the fibers from this sweater would be 100% matched to the single blue fiber found on the hem of Su Yuran's pink dress. But the most chilling discoveries were hidden out of sight. Detectives knelt and shone their flashlights under the bed. There, pushed back into the dust bunnies and shadows, lay a collection of items that did not belong to a 20-year-old male recluse. They pulled out a pair of white sneakers. They found a thick, down-filled winter jacket, and they found a gray backpack. These were the exact items Su Yuran was seen wearing in the surveillance footage at the Hangzhou South bus station on the morning of her disappearance. Inside the gray backpack, everything was intact. Her wallet, her ID card, her makeup bag, a small packet of tissues, and a notebook were all there. It was as if she had just set it down. The only thing missing from the bag was her mobile phone. The search team turned their attention to Xia's desk. In a wooden drawer, cluttered with cables and gaming peripherals, they found it. Su Yuran's smartphone. It was turned on. Digital forensics on site revealed a disturbing level of cold-blooded calculation. After killing her, Xia had not destroyed the phone. Instead, he had removed her SIM card and inserted his own, or sometimes used hers on Wi-Fi. He had logged out of her accounts and logged into his own, using her device to play games and browse social media for days, while her corpse decomposed in his neighbor's yard. He had lived with her ghost in his pocket, completely unbothered. Following the arrest, the final piece of the forensic puzzle fell into place. The DNA analysis from the semen found inside the victim came back. It was a perfect match to Xia Zhisheng. Furthermore, the skin cells found under Su Yuran's fingernails, evidence of her desperate final struggle, matched Xia's DNA profile with 99.9% certainty. Faced with this mountain of physical evidence, the fingerprints, the DNA, the victim's possessions in his room, and the phone in his desk, Xia Zhisheng knew there was no way out. The defiant, silent persona crumbled. During the interrogation, he slumped in his chair, his eyes fixed on the floor, and began to confess. His confession unraveled a story of deception, disappointment, and lethal insecurity. He admitted that he and Su Yuran were indeed lovers, but only in the digital realm. They had met in a public chat group on a social media platform 2 months prior. Xia, insecure about his reality as an unemployed dropout living with his parents, had crafted a false persona. Online, he was charming, mature, and confident. He projected an image of a successful young man, light years away from the hikikomori he actually was. Su Yuran, innocent and sheltered, had fallen for the fiction. She was 19, eager for independence, and too trusting of the world. She believed his words. She believed in the husband she spoke to every night. But Xia insisted to the detectives that he never intended to meet her. He enjoyed the fantasy of the relationship, but he knew that bringing it into reality would destroy the illusion. He had no job, no money, and no intention of changing his lifestyle. However, Su Yuran was persistent. She wanted to bridge the gap between the screen and real life. The investigation revealed that it was actually Shia who had initially planted the seed of a meeting, perhaps as a bluff to maintain his boyfriend persona. But when Su Yuran actually acted on it, he was caught off guard. On the morning of October 8th, Xia was still asleep when his phone buzzed. It was the message, "I am going to give you a big surprise today." He called her immediately. She answered, excited and happy. She was already on the bus. She was coming to Xiaoxiao village. Panic set in. He couldn't stop her. She was already en route. He scrambled to clean his room, shoving piles of trash out of sight, trying to make the space look presentable. He borrowed a motorcycle and rode to the bus stop on the main road to intercept her. When she stepped off the bus, she was real. She was beautiful, just like her photos. And for a moment, the fantasy seemed to hold. Jaya didn't take her home immediately. He knew his parents might return for lunch, or perhaps he was ashamed of his house. Instead, he took her to a scenic spot near the village, a stream that ran along the foot of the nearby mountain. This explained the forensic discrepancy regarding the mud. The two of them spent the late morning hours hiking and playing by the water. The gray-green sand and decayed leaf matter found on Su Yuran's body came from this location. At one point, she slipped on the damp bank and slid down a slope, staining her dress and legs with the specific river mud that would later baffle investigators at the dry scrap yard. As noon approached, the rain began to fall harder. Shia knew his parents would not be coming home for lunch that day, so he invited her back to his house. He cooked for her. He made a simple meal of noodles and hard-boiled eggs. They ate together in his kitchen. It was a domestic scene that masked the impending violence. After lunch, he led her to his bedroom. This was his sanctuary, the place where he felt most powerful. He wanted to impress her. He showed off his computer, his speakers, and his high-level video game accounts, the only things in the world he possessed of any value. But this was where the fantasy shattered. Su Yuran looked around the room. She saw the grime, the cheap furniture, the claustrophobic atmosphere of a life spent in hiding. The mature, successful man she had fallen for online was actually a boy living in squalor, obsessed with video games. Her demeanor changed. The excitement faded from her eyes, replaced by a cold realization. She became distant. She stopped engaging in his conversation. She pulled out her phone and started watching videos, ignoring him. She made it clear she was bored and disappointed. Xia Shisheng sensed the shift immediately. He sat there, watching her ignore him, and his insecurity curdled into rage. He felt the judgment radiating from her. He realized that once she left this room, she would leave his life. She would go back to the city, block him, and he would be alone again. The thought of rejection was unbearable to his ego. He approached her. He tried to initiate intimacy, thinking he could salvage the connection physically. When she resisted, his possession instinct triggered. He wasn't going to let her leave. He locked the bedroom door. He threw her onto the bed. Su Yuran fought back. She was small, but she was desperate. She screamed, she kicked, and she spat in his face. She told him she was going to call the police. She told him he was disgusting. Her resistance only fueled his fury. Because he was physically weak from years of inactivity, he couldn't easily overpower her. He grabbed pieces of his own clothing and used them to bind her hands, rendering her defenseless. Then he raped her. But the assault didn't satisfy his rage. It only escalated the situation. He knew he had crossed a line. If he let her go now, his life was over. She would report him. Everyone would know what he was. In that moment, looking at the girl who had once called him husband, he decided she had to die. He wrapped his hands around her neck. She thrashed against him, her fingernails clawing at his arms, scratching deep enough to capture his skin cells. But he didn't let go. He squeezed with all the strength in his wiry frame, watching the life drain out of her eyes until she went limp. Silence returned to the room. Jia Zhisheng sat on the edge of the bed, panting. The girl was dead. His reaction was not horror or remorse. It was practical. He checked her pulse to make sure she was gone. Then, he wrapped her body in the heavy quilt on his bed, covering her completely. He picked up her phone. He deleted the chat history. He blocked their mutual contacts. He wiped the evidence of her trip. Once he felt the digital trail was cold, he swapped the SIM card. For the next 4 days, Xia Zhisheng lived with the corpse. He slept in the same room. He played video games just feet away from where his dead girlfriend lay bundled in a quilt. He went about his life as if nothing had happened. But on October 12th, reality intruded. His parents announced that they were hosting a large family gathering and dinner that evening. Relatives would be coming over. His young cousins, who were notoriously mischievous, would likely run into his room to play on his computer, just as they always did. If they pulled back the quilt, it would be over. Panic returned. He had to move her. At noon on October 12th, taking advantage of a lull in the rain and his parents' absence, he decided to dump the body. He couldn't carry her far. He wasn't strong enough, and he didn't have a car. He looked out his window. The neighbor, Xie Xiuhua, had a scrapyard just over the fence. It was close, it was messy, and it was private. He dragged Su Yuran's body out of his house, through the back door, and across the muddy patch of land separating the two properties. He pushed her body under the fence and dragged her to the pile of cardboard. He shoved her underneath the debris and pulled the heavy tarp over her. He intended to bring her back. He told police his plan was to retrieve the body after the family dinner was over, perhaps the next morning, to figure out a more permanent solution. But he overslept. On the morning of October 13th, before he could wake up and retrieve her, Xie Xiuhua walked out to check her scrap pile. The discovery was made. The police were called, and Xia Zhisheng watched from his window as the yellow tape went up, knowing his time had run out. By the winter of 2018, the quiet village of Shaijiao had returned to a semblance of normalcy, but the shadow of the murder still hung heavy over the community. The scrapyard behind Sheishua's house had been cleared, yet locals still walked past it with averted eyes, haunted by the knowledge of what had lain beneath the tarps. Meanwhile, in the sterile offices of the Wuning District Prosecutor's Office, the legal machinery was grinding forward with relentless precision. For 2 months following his arrest, investigators worked tirelessly to solidify the case against Xia Zhisheng. They were not taking any chances. Although Xia had confessed, the prosecution knew that confessions could be retracted or challenged in court. They needed the physical evidence to be unassailable. They cataloged every gigabyte of data from the stolen phone, mapped every inch of the crime scene, and finalized the DNA reports that linked Xia to the sexual assault and the murder. On December 20th, 2018, the investigation phase formally concluded. The People's Procuratorate of Wuning District officially filed an indictment against Xia Zhisheng. The charges were a laundry list of depravity: intentional homicide, rape, robbery, and the desecration of a corpse. The robbery charge stemmed from his theft of Su Yuran's mobile phone and digital assets, while the desecration charge addressed the callous way he had dumped and concealed her body in a pile of trash. The trial date was set for the following spring. It would take nearly 5 months for the court to convene, a period of agonizing waiting for Su Yuran's family. For them, every day was a fresh reminder of the daughter who had left home with a smile and a promise to return, only to be returned to them in a sealed casket. On May 9, 2019, the Wuning County People's Court opened its doors for the first instance trial. Due to the heinous nature of the crime and the intense public interest surrounding the online dating murder, security was tight. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, legal observers, and members of the local community filled the gallery. But the emotional center of the room was occupied by two families broken by the tragedy. On one side sat Su Yuran's parents and her older brother. They wore the heavy, hollowed-out expressions of people who had cried until there were no tears left. They were there to look into the eyes of the monster who had stolen their little Ran. On the other side sat Xia Zishang's parents. They kept their heads bowed low, shrinking into their seats, crushed under the weight of shame. They were the parents of a killer, neighbors who had unknowingly harbored a corpse, and the community's judgment weighed on them as heavily as the law weighed on their son. When the bailiffs brought Xia Zishang into the courtroom, a ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. He did not look like a monster. He looked frail. Months of detention had thinned him out even further. He wore a standard prison vest. His shoulders slumped, his frame gaunt. He walked with his head down, refusing to make eye contact with anyone, not the judge, not his weeping parents, and certainly not the family of the girl he had strangled. Throughout the proceedings, Xia remained almost catatonic. He spoke only when directly addressed by the judge, his voice barely rising above a whisper. He offered no outbursts, no tears, and no visible signs of remorse. It was a chilling display of detachment, as if he were watching the trial of a stranger rather than fighting for his own life. The prosecution opened with a blistering account of the crime. They walked the court through the timeline, the deception of the online romance, the lure of the meeting, the sexual assault, the murder, and the 4 days he spent sleeping next to the body. They projected photos of the crime scene, the bed, the phone, the scrapyard. They played the recovered logs of his gaming sessions, proving that while Su Yuran's family was frantically searching for her, Shai was busy leveling up in a video game using her phone's data connection. The prosecutor argued that this was not a crime of passion, but a crime of extreme malice. Xia had not only killed Su Yuran, he had erased her. He had stolen her identity to cover his tracks and treated her body like garbage to save his own reputation. The defense attorney, appointed to represent Xia, faced an uphill battle. With the confession and DNA evidence being irrefutable, they could not argue innocence. Instead, they argued for mercy. The defense strategy hinged on Xia's psychological state and his background. The lawyer painted a picture of a young man who was socially stunted, a hikikomori who had lost the ability to distinguish between the virtual world and reality. They argued that Xia had limited cognitive capacity for social interaction, that he was impulsive, and that his judgment was impaired by years of isolation. He is a child who never grew up, the defense argued, suggesting that his actions were driven by panic and immaturity rather than calculated evil. They pleaded for a suspended death sentence or life imprisonment, citing his lack of a prior criminal record and his voluntary confession after arrest as grounds for leniency. But the prosecution was ready for this. They countered immediately, dismantling the helpless loner narrative with cold, hard facts. The prosecutor pointed out the meticulous nature of Xia's post-murder actions. A person acting out of sheer panic does not carefully remove a SIM card to swap it with their own. A person with limited cognitive capacity does not have the foresight to delete specific chat logs, block mutual contacts, and impersonate the victim to keep her friends at bay. These were the actions of a rational, calculating mind. Furthermore, the court had ordered a full psychiatric evaluation of Xia Zisheng prior to the trial. The results were read into the record. Xia Zisheng was fully eager and capable of understanding the nature of his actions. He suffered from no mental illness that would absolve him of responsibility. He knew right from wrong. He simply chose not to care. The judges listened intently. The panel, consisting of senior magistrates, had to weigh the severity of the crime against the defendant's age and background. In Chinese criminal law, the death penalty is reserved for those who commit crimes that have extremely serious consequences or are done in an extremely cruel manner. As the trial moved to the sentencing phase, the courtroom grew deathly silent. The presiding judge stood to deliver the verdict. He looked down at Xia Zisheng, who was still staring blankly at his own shackles. The judge's voice rang out, cutting through the tension. He stated that while the defendant had no prior record, the brutality of the crime was undeniable. The court found that Xia had lured the victim with deceit, violated her trust, and then violated her body. When she resisted, he killed her not in self-defense, but to silence her. The most damning factor, the judge noted, was the motive. He killed her because he possessed a twisted possessiveness and an extreme selfishness. He valued his own comfort and his secret life more than he valued a human life. The disposal of the body, dumping a young girl in a scrap heap like refuse, showed a complete lack of humanity and respect for the dead. The court rejected the defense's plea for leniency. "The circumstances are particularly vile," the judge read from the prepared statement. "The means were cruel, and the consequences to society are extremely severe. The defendant is legally sane and acted with direct intent." Then came the sentences, falling like hammer blows. For the crime of intentional homicide, Xia Zisheng was sentenced to death. For the crime of rape, he was sentenced to 18 years in prison. For the crime of desecrating a corpse, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. For the crime of robbery, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. The court combined these sentences into a final decision. The death penalty, to be carried out immediately upon approval by the Supreme People's Court, coupled with the permanent deprivation of political rights and the confiscation of all personal assets. In addition to the criminal penalties, the court ordered Xia to pay restitution to Su Yuran's family for funeral expenses and psychological damages. It was a symbolic amount no money could replace their daughter, but it was a legal acknowledgement of their loss. When the word death was spoken, a sob broke out from the gallery. It was Xia's mother. She collapsed against her husband, her wails filling the room. Su Yuran's family simply held each other, tears streaming down their faces, finding a grim solace in the justice that had been served. But even as the sentence was handed down, Xia Zisheng remained unmoved. He did not flinch. He did not cry out. He stood there, a hollow shell of a man, accepting his fate with the same apathy he had shown throughout the investigation. Following the trial, as is standard in capital cases, the sentence was automatically sent for review. Xia had the right to appeal, to beg for a second chance, to claim that the sentence was too harsh for a 20-year-old. The legal process dragged on for another year, moving through the appellate courts and the final review by the Supreme People's Court in Beijing. Every legal avenue was explored, every argument re-examined, but in every instance, the higher courts upheld the original verdict. The evidence was too overwhelming, the crime too grotesque. There was no redeeming factor to be found in the file of Xia Zisheng. On May 12, 2020, nearly 2 years after Su Yuran took that fateful bus ride, the final order arrived. The Supreme People's Court had signed the execution warrant. That morning, officials at the detention center informed Xia Zisheng that his time had come. In accordance with the law, he was allowed to meet with his family one last time. The meeting was brief, separated by glass and bars. His parents wept, looking at their only son, who was about to be erased from the world. But it was in these final moments, right before he was led away to the execution chamber, that Xia Zisheng finally spoke his mind. He was asked if he had any last words, any expression of remorse for the girl he killed, or the pain he caused. The officers and legal witnesses expected a breakdown. They expected fear, or perhaps a late apology, to try and cleanse his soul. Instead, Xia looked up with cold, dead eyes and delivered a statement that chilled everyone present to the bone. "If I could do it again," he said, his voice steady, "I would still do the same thing." He paused, then added the justification that had driven him to murder. "She did not have the right to leave me." With those final words, the true nature of Xia Zhisheng was laid bare. There was no madness, no confusion, no panic. There was only a terrifying, narcissistic entitlement. In his mind, Su Yuran was not a person with her own dreams, her own family, and her own rights. She was an object that belonged to him. And if she wouldn't be his object, she wouldn't be anything at all. He was executed shortly after. The method was lethal injection. The life of the 21-year-old recluse ended as quietly as it had been lived, leaving behind 2 shattered families and a cautionary tale written in blood. The legal case was closed. The files were boxed up and archived. But the questions raised by the death of Su Yuran did not vanish with the execution of her killer. The online dating murder became a case study in criminal psychology, sparking intense debates across social media and news outlets. How does a quiet boy next door turn into a rapist and murderer? Was it the isolation? Was it the internet? Or was there something inherently broken inside him from the start? The tragedy of this case lies not just in the violence of the act, but in the terrifying normalcy of the actors. Su Yuran was a normal girl looking for love. Xia Zhisheng was a normal-looking boy living in a normal village. They were characters in a story that plays out thousands of times a day across the world. Boy meets girl online. But in this story, the screen hid a darkness that no one, not even the killer's own parents, saw coming. As we move to the final analysis of this case, we must look beyond the forensic evidence and the courtroom transcripts. We need to understand the psychology of the invisible predator. We need to ask ourselves how we can protect the ones we love in an age where monsters don't hide under beds, they hide behind avatars. The execution of Xia Zhisheng in 2020 brought a legal end to the case. But for those who looked closely at the details, the file could not simply be closed and forgotten. The chilling final statement of the murderer, "She did not have the right to leave me," echoes like a ghost in the machine. A terrifying mantra of a new kind of killer bred in the dark, quiet corners of modern society. To understand the tragedy of Su Yuran, we must look beyond the gruesome mechanics of the murder and dissect the psychology of the man who killed her. Xia Zhisheng was not a career criminal. He was not a gangster hardened by the streets. Nor was he a drug addict desperate for a fix. On paper, he was a ghost, a person with no criminal record, no history of violence reported to the police, and no visible scars. He was, to the outside world, simply the quiet boy next door. This normalcy is what makes the case so terrifying. We are taught to fear the shadowy figure in the alley, the stranger with the wild eyes. But Xia Zhisheng was none of these. He was a product of a specific modern phenomenon, the socially isolated, digitally radicalized recluse. In psychology, there is a profile often associated with this type of sudden, explosive violence. Xia fits the mold of the injustice collector. For 5 years, he sat in his room, unemployed and unmotivated, living off his parents' resources. To the casual observer, he was just lazy. But inside that room, a toxic narrative was building. He likely viewed his lack of success not as a result of his own inaction, but as a grievance against the world. He retreated into video games and social media, where he could control the environment, where he could be a hero, a winner, or a romantic lead without putting in the effort required in the real world. This distortion of reality is dangerous. In the digital world, interactions are transactional and controllable. If you don't like the game, you restart. If you don't like a conversation, you block the user. Xia Zhisheng brought this digital mindset into the physical world. When Su Yuran arrived, a living, breathing human being with her own thoughts and feelings, she did not follow his script. She was disappointed. She was bored. She wanted to leave. To a well-adjusted person, Rejection is painful but manageable. To a narcissist living in a fantasy world, rejection is an existential threat. It shattered the delusion he had built. When Su Yuran tried to end the date, she wasn't just rejecting him, she was destroying the only version of himself he liked, the online avatar. In his mind, destroying her was the only way to regain control. The brutality of the murder stands in stark contrast to the banality of his life. He strangled her with his bare hands, a method of killing that is intimate, prolonged, and requires a sustained will to destroy. It takes minutes to strangle someone to death, minutes of looking into their eyes, minutes of feeling their struggle. This was not a momentary lapse of judgment. It was a sustained decision to extinguish a life. What is perhaps even more disturbing than the murder itself is the compartmentalization that followed. For 4 days, Xia Zhisheng lived with the body. Most people would be paralyzed by guilt or terror after taking a life. Zia, however, simply incorporated the corpse into his routine. He slept in the same room. He played games. He ate meals. This suggests a profound lack of empathy, a psychological state where other human beings are viewed as objects useful when they serve a purpose, and disposable trash when they do not. The fact that he used her phone to impersonate her and keep her family at bay adds a layer of predatory cunning to his profile. He wasn't just hiding a body, he was actively manipulating the grief and hope of her parents. He knew they were looking for her, and he used that hope to buy himself time to play more video games. It is a level of callousness that chills the blood. We must also look at the environment that enabled this. Xia Zhisheng was 20 years old, yet he lived like a child, completely dependent on his parents. While his parents certainly did not raise him to be a murderer, the dynamic of the household, the giant baby syndrome, where adult children are shielded from the responsibilities of the world, created a vacuum where his immaturity could fester into something malignant. They fed him, housed him, and left him alone in his room, likely unaware that they were warehousing a ticking time bomb. This case serves as a grim warning about the invisible predators in our midst. In the age of the internet, we often feel that we know someone because we have spoken to them for hours, days, or months online. Su Yuran believed she knew Xia Zhisheng. She believed in the husband who sent her sweet messages and promised her a future. But she didn't know him. She knew a projection. The lesson here is harsh but necessary. Trust must be earned in the real world, not the digital one. The transition from an online connection to a physical meeting is the most dangerous moment in any modern relationship. Su Yuran made a fatal mistake, not because she was stupid, but because she was kind. She traveled to his territory. She went to his home. She allowed herself to be isolated with a stranger in a private space before vetting him in a public one. It is easy to blame the victim in hindsight, to ask why she went into that house. But we must remember that predators like Xia Zhisheng are masters of manipulation. He didn't drag her into the house. He invited her. He cooked her noodles. He created a false sense of domestic safety before the trap snapped shut. The tragedy of Su Yuran is also a story of lost potential. She was 19. She had struggled in school, but she had a supportive family and a life ahead of her. She wanted to be independent. She wanted to work. She wanted to love. All of that was stolen in a dirty bedroom by a man who felt he was owed her affection. Her death left a crater in the lives of those who loved her. The image of her parents in the courtroom, weeping as the verdict was read, is a stark reminder of the collateral damage of murder. They did not just lose a daughter, they lost their future. They have to live the rest of their lives knowing that their child died alone, terrified at the hands of a man who didn't even care enough to apologize. And what of the village? Xiaozhou village will forever be marked by this crime. The scrapyard behind She Shihua's house has been cleared, the grass has grown back, and the seasons have changed. But the memory remains. It is a reminder that evil does not always look like a monster. Sometimes it looks like the neighbor's son. Sometimes it lives right next door, hiding behind a thin bamboo fence, waiting for the moment when the mask can finally slip. As we conclude this narrative, we are left with the uncomfortable truth that there are no winners here. Justice was served, the killer is dead, but justice is cold comfort to a grieving family. The death penalty removed Xia Zhisheng from the world, but it could not undo the damage he caused. This case forces us to confront the reality of modern dating and the darkness that can hide behind a screen. It forces us to ask how well we really know the people we talk to, and how well we know the people living under our own roofs. Su Yuran's story is over, but for us, the living, it remains a cautionary tale. It reminds us to be vigilant, to protect our boundaries, and to never let the desire for connection blind us to the red flags of danger. Life is rarely a flat, smooth road. One hasty decision, one misplaced trust, one moment of letting our guard down is enough to pull us into a darkness from which there is no return. We must remain awake. We must remain aware, because in a world where anyone can be anyone behind a screen, the most dangerous thing you can do is believe that you are safe. And that is the tragic case of the online dating murder from Hangzhou. What started as a digital romance between two young people ended in a horrific crime that exposed the dangers of the internet and the terrifying psychology of a secluded narcissist. Su Yuran, a hopeful 19-year-old girl, traveled 50 miles to surprise her online boyfriend, only to find that the man she loved was a fiction, and the reality was a nightmare she would not survive. This case serves as a brutal reminder that the person we talk to online is a curated avatar, often hiding a reality that is vastly different and potentially dangerous. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this case in the comments below. Do you think the parents of the killer, who enabled his isolation for years, bear any moral responsibility for what he became? Or was Xia Zhisheng simply a monster born, not made? If you found this case analysis compelling, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into true crime cases from around the world. Stay safe, stay skeptical, and I'll see you in the next video.